Carnegie Hall in New York City, the home of the world's greatest musical events. Today's event is one in a series of New York Philharmonic Young People's Concerts under the musical direction of Leonard Bernstein.
And here is Mr. Bernstein.
You may have noticed that our stage isn't as full as usual today. Only about half the Philharmonic is needed for this special music we're going to be playing. But don't be disappointed. We'll make up for that by the large number of guest artists we're going to have. 7 different soloists and 4 different conductors, including me. And the important thing is that they're all young people, except old me, of course. The youngest performer being a boy of 13, and the oldest, an old man of 32. As you know, we devote one of our programs each year to presenting very gifted young performers. We invite them to play with the Philharmonic, while at the same time I invite our 3 young assistant conductors to share this podium with me. And so we begin our concert with an overture, naturally, to be conducted by our youngest assistant conductor, the 26-year-old Seiji Ozawa, who comes to us all the way from Japan. Mr. Ozawa is making quite a splendid reputation, both in this country and in his own. And I think he's in for a brilliant future. I bet you'll think so too when you hear him conduct the overture to Mozart's great opera, The Marriage of Figaro. Here is Seiji Ozawa. A good beginning. And now we have the honor to present our first young soloist. When I say honor, I mean it, for this is something way out of the ordinary. First of all, Gary Carr is only 20 years old. Secondly, his instrument is a madly difficult and unusual one for solo playing, the double bass, believe it or not. And thirdly, Gary is already at the age of 20 a master of this unlikely instrument. There are very few double bass players in the world who dare to play solos on their instruments, at least in public. Have you ever heard a double bass recital? I doubt it. But every once in a while, someone comes along who bowls you over by being able to make this ungainly instrument sing, whether it's high or low. And Gary Carr is one of these. I don't know when I've ever heard anything like it since the great conductor Koussevitzky, who was my teacher and who was famous all over the world as a double bass soloist before he became a conductor. I believe that young Mr. Carr is on his way to being another Koussevitzky. And because he is so unusual, we've asked him to play two pieces with the orchestra. He will begin with a tender, quiet little piece by Ernest Bloch called Preya. The orchestra will be conducted by our oldest assistant conductor, 32, terribly old, and that is Maurice Perez, a young man of extraordinary talent. We are proud to present Gary Carr and Maurice Perez. fantastic, isn't it? An amazing performance. Well, you've heard Mr. Carr in a sweet melodic piece. Now you're going to hear some fireworks on the double bass. There are a lot of names connected with this next piece, so listen carefully. It all started with a melody from an opera by Rossini called Moses in Egypt. Then this melody was taken by the great violinist Paganini, who made it into a fantasy with variations on the melody, for violin, of course. Then came a man named Reinshagen, who was Mr. Carr's teacher and a former member of our Philharmonic bass section, who transcribed these variations for the double bass with piano accompaniment. They're hard enough to play on the violin, but on the double bass you can hardly believe what you're hearing. And last of all came Gary Carr himself, who has orchestrated this piano accompaniment, especially for this performance with the Philharmonic. So the whole name of this piece is The Moses Fantasy by Rossini, Paganini, Reinshagen, Carr. Clear? Mr. Carr's orchestration will be conducted by our very fine assistant conductor, John Canarina, who is a mere 27 years old. Mr. Canarina has just been appointed conductor of the Jacksonville, Florida Symphony Orchestra starting next season, and I'm sure we all want to congratulate him on this big step in his career. John Canarina.
Now, here to speak for Shell Oil Company, its president, Monroe E. Spate.
We're now going to play The Carnival of the Animals by the charming and masterful French composer Saint-Saëns. This is really a piece for young people. For one thing, it's a sort of loony fantasy about the zoo, full of amusement and frolic. And although it was written by Saint-Saëns mainly to amuse his friends, it was also partly to give young music students something to play that might be fun instead of always a serious grind. So we thought, as long as this is true, why not invite young people to play it with us? And that's what we've done. Of course, the string orchestra here is from the Philharmonic, all old fogies, but everyone else is a specially invited youthful artist. The main soloists of the piece are a two-piano team who get a lot of work to do in this carnival, and they are these lovely identical twins, Ruth and Naomi Siegel. Ruth is 21 years old, and so is Naomi. Then we have another lovely young lady, only 20, who will play the flute and piccolo, Paula Robeson. The clarinet part will be played by a mighty 13-year-old named Paul Green. The xylophone is in the hands of Tony Cirone, who is 20. And the glockenspiel is entrusted to David Hopper, who is 14. The double bass, of course, will be played by our dear old friend, Gary Carr. Now, like most visits to the zoo, this one begins with a look at the lion. Since the lion is the king of beasts, Saint-Saëns has written what he calls a royal march, complete with trumpet-like fanfares and a good deal of roaring. Now we make two visits in a row. First to a flock of hens and roosters, whose cackling I'm sure you'll recognize, and then onto a cage of wild donkeys from Tibet, who are called émions in French, and are variously known in Tibetan as jigetai or kiang or gur. But whatever you call them, they are famous for their speed. They seem to be flying, as you'll hear when the 20 fingers of our twins fly over the keys at an unbelievable rate. So here are first the chickens, and then the jigetai. In his next two visits, we do these two at a time, Saint-Saëns begins to make some inside musical jokes. And just so that you'll get them, I'll let you in on the secret. In the first piece, he wants to describe turtles and tortoises. And what better way to poke fun at these slow-moving critters than to use the fastest music he can think of. So he borrows this famous can-can tune from Offenbach's opera, Orpheus in the Underworld. He takes that famous tune and simply slows it down to a stupefied crawl. And in the second piece, which is about elephants, he does the same kind of trick. He picks two of the lightest, most fairy-like tunes he can think of and just gives them to the heavy old double basses to play. One tune is from the Dance of the Sylphs by Berlioz. It goes like this. And the other tune is from the light-footed scherzo of Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream music. Now, wait till you hear them played by our elephants over here. Each one of them a Koussevitzky in his own right. All right, all set for those speedy turtles and those elf-like elephants. Delicate little wee folk, aren't they? But now we hop over to the kangaroo department, again featuring our twin pianos, and then to the aquarium, where the gliding of the fish is pictured for us by a smooth melody in the strings and flute, while the water is described by trickling runs on the pianos in the style of Chopin. And then there are a few extra drops of water on the little bells, or glockenspiel. That's Mr. Hopper's department up there. We are all set now for our visits to, what was it? The kangaroos and the fish. Our next two visits need no musical explanation at all. First, Saint-Saëns takes us to a cage marked persons with long ears, meaning donkeys, of course, but I think he had in mind certain people he knew that he considered jackasses. This hee-hawing music is played only by violins, but then we come to the cuckoo, singing his monotonous two notes over and over again, and that will be Master Green on the clarinet, while the two pianos play rather cuckoo harmonies of their own. Now, first the jackass, then the cuckoo. Now, on to the birdhouse, where every kind of bird imaginable is whirling and wheeling around. This is a real acrobatic act for our gifted young flute player, Paula Robeson. And now, Saint-Saëns turns to a very peculiar animal indeed, called the pianist. This is a not very subtle takeoff on poor young piano students who are grinding away at their scales and exercises. Any of you who have ever had to sweat through piano exercises will sympathize with these animals, I'm sure. now we shall have a look at some fossils, the skeleton remains of old prehistoric dinosaurs and such. And here Saint-Saëns quotes from 6 different pieces of music, including one of his own, Danse Macabre, which is about skeletons anyway. I'm sure you remember it. Remember this famous tune? Well, that tune is given to the xylophone, which is the perfect instrument for describing dry old bones. Then you'll also hear quotes from French folk songs like J'ai du beau tabac dans ma tabatière, j'ai du beau tabac, tu n'en auras pas. And out of that tune, Saint-Saëns makes a canon or a round like 3 blind mice, only with the second voice playing the tune upside down like this. And then immediately afterwards, the pianos play another canon based on another French folk tune, À vous dirai-je, maman, ce qui cause mon tourment. And here's how the canon sounds. And on top of that canon, the clarinet comes in with this well-known folk tune. Of course, you know the name of that one, Clair de la Lune. Then the clarinet goes on quoting another old-fashioned French song that was popular at the time called Going to Syria. And finally, he quotes this bit from Rossini's opera, The Barber of Seville. Now, why all those particular tunes? It's because they're all famous old-timers, the best-known fossils in music. So here they all are, dancing around in their bones. And now we come to the most famous part of this Carnival of the Animals, the swan. Everybody knows this lovely melody, originally written for a solo cello, accompanied by the rippling waters of these 2 pianos. But since today we have with us our amazing Mr. Carr, we're going to hear the swan, perhaps for the first time, played on the double bass. Listen and be amazed. And so we reach the end of our trip to the zoo with a brilliant, gay final dance in which several of the animals we've come to know get together in a can-can of their own. And if you listen hard, you'll recognize the old lion from the beginning, those flying donkeys from Tibet, the jigatai, a few hens and roosters, a kangaroo or two, and at the very end, you'll hear 6 wild hee-haws from those long-eared persons, as if to say, hee-haw, the last laugh is had by the jackass.
From Carnegie Hall, another in the New York Philharmonic Young People's Concerts, under the musical direction of Leonard Bernstein, has been presented by Shell Oil Company, sign of a better future for you. The preceding program was pre-recorded at Carnegie Hall, New York City, and was produced and directed by Roger Englander. This is the last in this series of 4 concerts by the New York Philharmonic. Today's program featured young performers. On this 5th season of televised concerts of the Young People's Series, Mr. Bernstein has conducted Debussy's La Mer and Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe in a program devoted to Impressionism. Gershwin's An American in Paris, Shlomo by Bloch, and dances from The Three-Cornered Hat by De Falla in a concert titled The Road to Paris, and the score to the ballet Petrushka on a special birthday celebration to its composer, Igor Stravinsky.